Good morning and afternoon, and welcome to the Climate Cafe Multi-Faith. We're so glad you're here. The Climate Cafe Multi-Faith is an opportunity for faith leaders to just come together and talk about what it means, the intersection between creation, climate, justice, and faith. And those kinds of conversations are often pretty big and really I so appreciate those who come to share conversation and lead conversation. Today, we're welcoming William Morris. So William Morris has been to the cafe before, led conversation for us before, and just really appreciate him so much. He is a climate activist based in California. He's worked with Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, and he sits on the advisory board for that organization. And he is also working now with Green Faith and the People versus Fossil Fuels Coalition that is worldwide. So we invited him here to talk about green teams, how to engage with youth, how to engage with Black, Indigenous people of color, how to build a community type of effort, community team, green team in our communities that reflects the people who are stakeholders in our communities, builds relationships. And so, yes, William, I'm just so glad you're here, and just turn it over to you.
Thank you all. I figured I'd start out with like why I ended up where I'm at and what happened there. So I grew up in Southern California, in the city of Torrance, and we have a big refinery here that's been here a very long time. And so many times when I was young and in school, I can remember having to shelter in place because gas escapes from the refinery, they're flaring, things are happening, and having to run inside, seal the doors with tape and that kind of thing. And as I got older, realizing that's not a normal thing to experience. And when I was in high school, I was lucky enough to take this environmental science AP class. And it was super interesting. I learned all about the climate crisis. I learned all about fossil fuels and what they're doing to our earth. And the refinery is a block away from the high school. So you could see the refinery out from the back of this classroom where I'm learning about all the things that are happening. And I really, as I got educated in that class, I began to look up, how many refineries are in Southern California and what's going on around. And as I looked up things, I realized within maybe 7 or 8 miles of my house, there's like 6 refineries, which isn't uncommon for people who live in Southern California. It's so packed here. But learning about the impact it has on our communities, especially our communities of color, even here, like in the city where I live, who gets affected the first and the worst. But I also grew up Christian. I grew up in a very conservative, white evangelical church. And that was all I knew until I got older. And I am much more progressive now and kind of got away from that. But since I grew up in those circles, learning to be able to talk to people who are still there as well and use language that might be more comfortable for them to talk about things. And I know that has been something that I've been doing these past several weeks with a lot of these Supreme Court decisions coming out and talking to people in my circles in my life who don't view things the same way, but kind of talking about, this is, really harmful stuff. This is bad. Here's what's going on. Here's why this is, not something you should be celebrating, different things like that. And it can be hard, I think, as a young person as well, always not being listened to many times in church or not being taken seriously. So there's a lot of converging things that have happened, but happy where I've ended up, where I get to do faith-based climate justice. And I get to be in circles like this with you all, getting to hear your stories and what's going on. But I also get to reach out to young people who, used to go to church, don't attend anymore, maybe are on the fence about it. I feel like I'm very stubborn, which is why, like Christian said, I've dug in and I'm still here. But trying to do that as well. Reaching out to these young people who learn to care in their houses of worship. They learned all these values and these morals, but then when they tried to live them out, when it came to things like climate change, they saw that there wasn't space for them and had to take it elsewhere. So learning how to create space for that as well. And so that's how I got involved with Green Faith. That's how I got involved with Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. I also chair the green team at my own church, and kind of seeing what we can do there as well. And so that's kind of like a broad intro, maybe too much. But yeah, Richenda, if you wanted to ask, if you had any questions about any of those roles that I may have.
Okay, so right off the bat, I have a question. So you just said something that I think we all have experienced, right? That the young people in the churches they grew up in, the young people who are coming into adulthood now, learned to care in church and had to take what they learned outside of the church. So they don't see the church as living out their values. How can I, as a green team leader who knows that the church has things to offer, like meeting space or pizza, or I know pizza sounds silly, but homemade cookies, those things among organizers are kind of gold, right? No matter what age you are. How can I reach across that hurt and that sense of betrayal that they have, and this sense that we're kind of written off, like there's that our direction is no direction. Anything you've tried that you found works?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has to do with a couple things. I've seen so many churches that are great about doing stuff and are wonderful and are very active, but people aren't showing up, and they have this space. And so I think one of the things about that is going out, right, outside the walls of your house of worship, into the place where young people are. Where are they organizing? What are they putting on? How do we show up? I think, as this space shows, everything is relationship based. We're all here together, building relationship with one another, getting to know one another and what we're involved in and what we're doing. And I think it's the same way there. And so I think the most success I've had doing youth faith organizing is just getting to know them and sitting down with them. I think so much of my time is spent with these people, outside of the church space, just kind of hanging out with them, getting to know them. And naturally, out of the things they care about and the things I care about and what we're talking about, these things come up. But you're there for them as an entire person as well. And so I think that relationship building is super important. I think a lot of times many churches or houses of worship, maybe they don't know exactly where to go or what to do. And so kind of feel stuck. But I think that is a big part of it is leaving that space. And part of what goes into that is many of the young people who are organizing are many young people of color. And so oftentimes, if your house of worship, if this church is older, it's mainly white, I feel like people who are younger, people of color who are younger aren't necessarily going to naturally gravitate into that space on their own. And so I think being able to go out into their space and build a relationship with them, show you have shared values, makes them a lot more comfortable. Because like you said, Richenda, a lot of times space is what's needed, like a meeting space, a place to hang out, a place where you can gather. All of these different things oftentimes is what young people are missing and don't have and kind of have to craft for themselves. I know even locally to me, there's this coffee shop where a lot of young people go because they don't have that other space. It's young people who really care about a lot of stuff, don't go to church, as much anymore, all these different things. But it's it's a shared space where they feel safe and can meet. And oftentimes I meet a lot of people there and talk about these sorts of things. And that's when the conversation kind of turns into, I'm still in this church, even if you're not, and that's okay. But we share these values, and how do we work together on that? And how can the faith infrastructure I'm still involved in support what they're doing, and vice versa. So a lot of times realizing, we have these resources as people of faith. We have these buildings, we have this money, we have these resources, and how are we making that intentional decision to spend it? And I think another thing as well is just being vocal. I think a lot of young people aren't sure what a church, what an organization might think on an issue. But I've had it where a lot of young people they hear something. They hear like this church put out a statement. This organization said something about this. They like voted, to go green or do this, whatever. And that's when they become interested and reach out and connect, is kind of like learning more about what is going on. And so, yeah, I think going outside of the space, build relationship. And then I think people will be more comfortable coming into that space as well. So that was a very long answer to a short question.
No, that was great. I think, as you were talking, I'm like in my head, remembering all these things I've seen that churches have done to try to sort of entice young people in. I'm thinking of the coffee shop movement. For a little while, churches were building coffee shops inside the church. And rather than being a sincere effort to meet people and discover what needed to change to live out the gospel, instead of that, what those coffee shops seemed to be doing was like a mechanism to like get you in to hear what they wanted you to hear.
Right. Yeah.
And bring you on board into their sanctuary and have you pay them. And, or if you were young, showcase you, in order, it's like the bait, but it doesn't work if you're not actually listening to and making changes that reflect the witness and life experiences, what God is doing in the lives of those young people. Instead, we assume God is doing nothing in the lives of those young people and they're outside of us. And I think there needs to be some permission giving in white older churches that, hey, if you're celebrating over a quinceañera, if you're celebrating with people who are who have relocated from Somalia, and there's a whole different set of foods, all of that is good.
Yeah, exactly. That made me think of two things too. I think one of them was that metaphor of bringing more chairs to the table. Like, who hasn't been at the table and who hasn't been heard? We just can reach out to them and they can come to our space and our table without examining, well, who built the table and who holds power there, right? And so it's kind of doing that same thing, because again, with the climate crisis, like everything else, it's people of color who are hurt first and worst. And so if we don't address those inequities, we are bound to repeat them in whatever future we are trying to build. And so that is a part of it, is like, we don't have time to focus on racism right now because the climate is falling apart. Well, it's all connected. And so you can't simply ignore some of those things because we're trying to save the world. Otherwise, the world we build is not going to be for everyone.